It's a very good afternoon to the Sportsfan Radio panel, the full-strength Sportsfan Radio panel today with the judge and the gelding back to join Paul Daligan and I. And I thought today we might kick off. John, in the time that you've been away from Sportsfan, you've penned a letter to Gillan McLachlan. Lay it upon us, please.
Well, thanks, Professor. Look, I'm a bit worried about Gorgeous Gill at the moment, Professor. He doesn't know whether he's coming or going. We've got a silly situation at the AFL with two popes, two CEOs, and I think the wheels are starting to fall off down there. So I just thought I'd kindly pen a letter to him because, we know he watches the show. So here we go. Dear Gill, it seems like you're having a bit of a hard time lately. So I thought I'd give you some suggestions to hopefully make life easier for you. Firstly, the Hawthorn thing, as you refer to it, Gill. My first bit of advice would be not to call it a thing. It sounds like something your horse mate trot on in a polo game and have to be scooped up by the spectators. For an organisation that has rules and procedures for just about everything, it's quite amazing that you don't have a rule, nor a procedure, nor a ready-made tribunal which can hear this dispute. It's pretty clear that the whole thing took you and the rest of the executives at AFL House by surprise. In an effort to be seen to be doing something to placate Aboriginal women, satisfy the stakeholders, the public and the media, that the issue was under control, you set up an inquiry to deal with the dispute. I say dispute, but I don't think anyone really knows what it's all about. The fact that the league is not equipped to really address the complainant's issue was a problem when the issue arose and is a continuing worsening problem for you and the AFL. It does seem as if the wheels of the entire case are coming off. My advice, particularly as I know you want to clean up your desk before you go, is get out of it now. You may be aware that there is already a government organisation set up to hear complaints about racial discrimination and human rights. That, of course, is the Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission. And I suggest the matter be referred to them. In addition, the federal government has set up a tribunal which is aligned with the sport integrity body, that's the International Sports Tribunal, and they have plenty of conciliators and mediators who can go off to try and resolve their dispute. If they can't, they should just avail themselves of their legal remedies like everybody else does. I know you're trying to protect the victim, but as I see it, the victims at this stage are Alistair Clarkson, Fagan, and Jason Burt. Yeah, that's my first run off the long run, Paul and Gelding.
Which of his 8 executives on $1 million a year did you send that to? Or do you go straight to the man?
It's quite extraordinary, isn't it, Paul, that they have got so many, you would think, able people up there. And this thing is just lurching. I just don't see it going anywhere other than ruining reputations. I heard the other day, Mark, that the complainants, representatives have subpoenaed or sought 17,000 documents in this case. And if that's right, that's becoming a huge piece of litigation that hasn't even started.
Well,
and correct me if I'm wrong, I thought... Oh, sorry, Professor, you go.
No, go on, Paul. Gelding's trying to get his bet up.
He's even money, yeah.
I thought the majority of delegations were verbal in nature. So are we talking about emails, some sort of conspiracy to stop what's alleged, or is it after the fact, after the events? It's I thought it was conversations regarding having children, etc. That was the main central component of it, but that's a lot of documents.
It's I actually don't know what the case is about. I mean, we heard, 8 months ago, what it was supposed to be about, but I'm not even sure that's a cause of action. It may be a fair work matter. It may be it probably is. I think a equal opportunity and human rights matter. But apart from that, I'm not sure where it goes. Gelding, what do you reckon?
Yeah, John, just a question for you. Like, I'm flabbergasted by all this. Like, Gil reckons he can do anything by I'll just do a deal, and everyone will follow suit. And as especially in your position and Mark's position and Paul's decision, sometimes things just cannot be settled.
Totally.
And here we've got, and I'm not exactly clear. You hear little snippets in the paper. We're saying, well, the people that the allegations are being made about haven't been told what they're supposed to have said, and they haven't been interviewed. So how can you get a settlement when you're only 8 months in and you haven't even got the story of the people allegations are made against, and the allegations are unknown?
Well, we talk about natural justice, Gelding. I thought the first bit of natural justice was who are my complainants? I'm not too sure they even know who they are. And what are they saying about me?
Yeah.
8 months later, if they're not even at that point, well, it's not natural justice, that's for sure. And that's right. Some cases can't be resolved. That's okay. Then rely upon your legal remedies. Sue them. They haven't. It makes you wonder whether they're ever going to.
Well, whether they've got a case.
Or whether they've got a case.
But just on that, I mean, it happened to all of us all the time, but you always get asked about how could you act for a murderer, or how could you act for someone who'd committed heinous crimes. If you know they've done it, you can't act for them, pure and simple. So you at least need to know what's alleged, and you'd be given a police brief. Not that I've done a lot of criminal work, but there is a misconception out there that you sort of are told, I killed a guy, can you get me off? It's not like that, but you at least need to know when you're told that I didn't kill the guy, what's alleged that you did and what is put to you. But this is an astounding situation, whether they're guilty or not of what's alleged. They at least need to know what it is that they apparently have done. Are they still trying to work out what they think they've done? But
do you get the impression, Paul, that the onus has been reversed to Clarkson and Fagan having to prove their innocence or something? That's just wrong.
Isn't the first test, John, someone who makes an allegation has to prove their case?
That's the golden rule, Gelding, yeah.
This one, it's kind of, let's defend something that we don't even know what we're defending.
I'll amend that. Hawthorn, which had been reviewing 37,000 documents.
Wow.
Was expected to finish production of the documents in a couple of days. So all the work seems to be poured onto Hawthorn and Clarkson and Fagan. And I don't actually know the other guy, Jason Burt, but that it just seems to be wrong, Professor, that this thing's been turned on its head.
Well, what do you think of the way Hawthorn's handled it? Just kind of got the hot potato and then passed it on to the AFL.
Well, everybody's criticising them, but what is the correct way to handle it?
Yeah.
I think, like, as I say, that the league has got tribunals and, procedures for everything, except this, that they shouldn't have got involved in the way they did. And I think it actually speaks to, they're so worried about their reputation with Aboriginal people, women, and when there's an Aboriginal woman involved, it makes it doubly hard for them. So they've tried to do it in-house because, as Mark said, he thinks he can resolve everything. Well, no.
Well, John.
Well, that's it, isn't it? They just thought, is it the old Zabs kind of boys club, or as we know the AFL to be the boys club? Oh, we can sort this out. We don't need what exists in the world. We've got our little group. We can fix it all up, and everyone will be happy.
And we'll keep it all in-house.
Yeah, and we'll brush it under the table and move on.
Yeah.
And that's the first mistake, John. The first mistake is to try and control it, because your suggestion of using experts who are set up to deal with these sorts of matters makes it completely impartial. Then nobody can have a problem with it. And if they do, well, you could probably say, well, that's then unreasonable. But if you look at it, what they try to do is set up an investigative panel. So the complaints come to light just before the grand final in September. There's a panel appointed on the 4th of October, and the investigative panel is said they'll wind up what they're doing by the end of December. Well, it's the 28th of May. What have we heard from the investigative panel? Nothing. Not a thing. What have they done? Who would know?
But more importantly, what have Clarkson and Fagan heard in the panel? And as I understand it, listen to Clarkson, he feels he's been totally abandoned by Hawthorn and by the league over this whole thing. And he's just, I hate to use the word victim, but He and Fagan and Bird are pretty close to being victims, I reckon.
Well, as I understand it from the reports I read, doing some research for the program today, Jason Burt was stood down for his job at Caulfield Grammar and still off work.
Gee,
Now,
I didn't know that.
how long does that go on for? Clarkson earlier or late last week decided to stand down from his job because the pressure's too great. The Hawthorn CEO, Stuart Fox, he's resigned. Now, with such a swathe of damage, I still don't feel any urgency from the AFL to get this thing resolved, and they're just kicking the can down the road.
Because they actually don't know what to do because there's no procedure for all this. And as you say, you take control of the process and ignore the courts. You do so at your peril.
I've got to say this. I don't want to draw parallels with rugby league or the peptide saga, but I do have to in this instance, that when the peptide saga became known to the Cronulla Sharks and the club doctor was informed that there was a front row forward being injected with a substance usually used for the things that Gelding bets on, they put their hand up and they addressed it. Whereas with the peptide saga, there were egos involved, there were denials. No one wanted to admit anything had happened that was wrong. In this case, it's just obfuscation and delays, but you need to get things actioned. You've got livelihoods. A friend of mine, his kids went to school with Alistair Clarkson's kids. They grew up without a father, pretty much. He was always at work. So you can see how much it would have taken a mental toll for the ultimate career coach to just pack it in. I'm sure there's other forces at play, but that can be put to one side in all this. Unfortunately, it's not the human toll, as you say, Judge. They're living with a presumption of guilt, and that is just an incredible burden for anyone to bear, even someone as committed and driven as Clarkson.
And I see that the procedures apparently run by, a KC. Now the public think, there's, the QC is a KC doing it. It must be right. Well, I don't think it is. I think it's flawed from the start, and it's just not getting any better.
The other thing, John, is that not only will the people who've made the complaints to Hawthorn be looking to take action against that down the track, perhaps, but also Clarkson, Fox, Jason Burt, they'll be looking to take action as well because it's affected their livelihoods.
Yeah, but again, what's the action?
Well, why wouldn't it be that the AFL has unreasonably handled this whole thing, therefore causing them damage?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Was it reasonably foreseeable that by them handling it in this way that there could be damage?
Yeah.
Okay.
And what does North Melbourne do? For they just lost their coach.
Exactly. So instead of the AFL saying, well, look, okay, we've had this, we're going to pass it on to the people who know how to deal with this. We can't do, by law, we couldn't have been expected to do anything else. And then that's it. They're away from it all. But I know they've decided to take the role on of peacemaker. And I see that I thought it was interesting that I heard on Friday morning on the news that the AFL and the First Nations family were close to reaching a resolution of the whole thing. And I thought, my crikey, that's moved a long way. Well, according to the Herald Sun, whatever proposed deal was on the tables collapsed.
Yeah.
So I think there'll be these tears that you quite often talk about, John.
Yeah, before big time. Yeah.
John, is it following the Essendon saga to the same path?
Well, finally, in the sense of this is what the AFL does when it doesn't know what it's doing. So there is, and because of their incredible self-belief and their ability to handle difficult problems, it's got that about it as well. But they are different things. But it has the same effect, doesn't it? It's affecting the so-called victims in all of this.
Well,
a lot of similar faces, in different positions, or at the AFL during the Essendon saga, and a lot of them are still around in today. And as we highlight here, the AFL is very good at patting itself on the back and saying what a great job they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you run a monopoly, it's pretty hard to stuff things up, isn't it? Not to make money.
Well, John, I think we can say that the Essendon saga and this Hawthorn saga, because I think we can now call it a saga, I think we can be guaranteed of one thing. We can both say about both of them, there'll be an unsatisfactory outcome.
Yeah. That's the worst thing, Mark. I still feel for Watson giving away his Brownlow, losing his Brownlow, plus all those other players whose careers were pretty much ruined, and reputation. So, yeah, if it's not resolved, that's the worst outcome.
Now, John, with all that good advice and with a full head of steam up, you found another topic to talk to Gil about.
Yeah, Gil, Tasmania. Hard to know where to start with this one. However, firstly, I would counsel you to stop bullying the Tasmanian government and those Tasmanians who want a football team in their state. Threatening to cancel the whole deal if the state doesn't build a new roofed stadium is neither good politics or, and this will worry you, not a good look. Understand that there are a range of views about this issue, not of all which align with yours. It can't be a surprise to you, although maybe it is, the two politicians from the state government have already resigned over this issue. That in itself should tell you that it's not all that simple. I note the purported cost of the stadium has dropped from $750 million a year ago to $715 million now. This must be the first time in history that a government project has gone down by 5% in cost over 1 year, particularly a year in which building costs have gone through the roof, excuse the pun, and interest rates have effectively doubled. Bear in mind also, Tasmania doesn't have a great record of building large infrastructure projects, and certainly not stadia. I must say that the maths of financing the build don't appear to stack up, plus we still don't know who's going to own it. What is pretty clear is that your successor is going to be left with a massive headache as to what to do about the situation, and not least whether he should be so unmoving in his insistence of a new roofed stadium. The concept which we often hear that Tasmania has a lot of young footballers just itching to get a game with their state team has got to be wrong. For a start, the best of them are probably playing at Scotch College, Haileybury, Geelong College or some other private school in Melbourne. Predicting that they'll be overjoyed by being compelled to return to Tasmania may be misplaced. A couple of other things. Tasmania, firstly, has two stadia with capacities around 18,000 patrons. This is slightly less than the proposed covered stadium of 23,000. And at least one of them could be improved to handle AFL games, provided the league's powerhouses aren't playing. You could theoretically start playing games, therefore, in 2024. Granted, there needs to be a lead-in. Perhaps this could be delayed a couple of years. No doubt the league could do what it did for GWS and Gold Coast and super stack a draft or four in order to make them competitive. You got away with it in GWS and Gold Coast, which aren't football areas, and it should be acceptable to the public for poor old Tasmania. At the moment, Tasmania is a bit split in terms of its supporters in what can be roughly described as the north and south divide. This will probably keep going for a decade or so. In the meantime, the new team can start to build up its popularity, and I think it'll be accepted by all the Tasmanians. Bottom line, get it done now. Get the thing moving. This stadium, I think, is going to absolutely stuff the whole project.
John, that's a great point. Is it, and again, I don't want to harp on it, is it just the AFL's arrogance of saying we'll control it from Melbourne down here, we'll sit in our little office without understanding all the intricacies with Tasmania, the political scene where, you've got plenty of independents and a few that like shooting off their mouths about anything that, anything at all, just to take an opposition side rather than fully understand it. And as you said, they've got two good ovals there. Why, if they can play Chess cricket at one of them, why can't they upgrade it a bit and make it an 18,000 full stadium for football?
Bear in mind, Gellner, the opposition, I think you might have spoken to one of the politicians, Mark, or trying to get him on the show, but the opposition is only favourable with this. The money doesn't stack up. So what's going to happen? It's just going to be a constant bleed on the Tasmanian thing, the Tasmanian project, and they'll be losing so much money. The AFL is going to have to support them every year.
Maybe with those figures that you quoted from AFL House, Gil can help Dan in the big build and get that back on. Get that back on track.
If it was in Victoria, we could do it. Tasmania, no. And we had an expert on how long ago? 6 months ago, Professor. The numbers didn't stack up then, and to say that it's gone down in price, so that's just BS. It'll be over $1 billion. Everybody knows it for a venue that's going to have 3 hours entertainment, 13 times a year.
So, well, John, but as I understand it, games will still be played in the north of the state to keep. Yes. So they won't play all their home games at the Hobart Stadium.
I'd heard 7 games a year.
That's 21 hours a year, Paul, for a $1 billion stadium. I mean, spare me.
Will they get Miley Cyrus?
We're going to have rock concerts. Oh, yeah, really?
Yeah, Miley Cyrus or somebody like that.
Yeah.
They might get a test, John, every second year.
And well, the other thing too, Professor, I really think they should, to resolve this, just get rid of GWS and Gold Coast, bite the bullet. They'll save themselves so much money, the AFL, and set up a team in Northern Territory. I think a Northern Territory team would be a sensation in every meaning of the word. It'll be fabulous, and it would work. And then we're back to 18 teams.
So do this for me, John. Put your Nostradamus hat on.
Yeah.
How do you see this playing? What do you think will actually happen?
I don't think we'll have a Tasmanian team for 5 years. I don't think, in fact, we'll have a Tasmanian team and stadium for 10 years unless there's a massive change of heart, and that can only come with a new CEO. The commission's bloody hopeless. They really should sack themselves, and maybe if they've got a new commission, maybe with Andrew Dillon pushing it, we could get a Tasmanian team in 5 years, but it will be at one of the 2 existing stadia. So I'm coming my bets a bit here, Professor, so I don't know, but if with the present bloody mindedness, there won't be a Tasmanian team for 10 years.
Do you think someone like Gale from Richmond, if he moves across to become the chief operating officer, being someone from Tasmania, but who's been on the mainland and been involved in big clubs, is the right type of person to push this through?
There's too many things have to happen. You know, I think one of them is the state government. Tasmania's got to support it. 2, the federal government's got to support whatever plans happen, and 3, the AFL's got to do it. So one person's not going to be by their personality, although she's very impressive, to do it by themselves.
I just think, you've got to have a driver from somewhere, and rather than, and his approach may be a little bit different than the we'll tell you what's happening, to do it, to actually work with people to.
Well, if she led the commission, that's the best way of getting this happening, because the commission still has a lot of sway, but they're just anonymous in this whole thing. In fact, I reckon that the commission's been anonymous for a few years, Professor.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you who sits on it.
Well, and Gil runs the place. I think we all know that.
Isn't it? We've discussed 2 topics now, Judge. Both of those topics have, as they're just running along in the background, that as far as the AFL is concerned, it's their way or the highway. Like, doesn't it flavour both of those topics that we've discussed, where, look, we're going to do it our way and we're not going to listen to anybody else? Except
the first one, they can be forgiven for not knowing what the hell they were doing. This one's different. I think the Tasmanian thing, to use Gil's word, been bubbling along for 30 years. You know, we've been trying to get a team down in Tasmania. So the fact that it's got to this stage, I think is just appalling. So this is a problem of the AFL's making. The other one, I think, was sort of, they got landed with it, didn't know what to do.
All right, Judge. Yeah, you've got one further salvo for Gil.
Women's football. Finally, Gil, at least pretend to be interested in the women's version of the game. As Chelsea and Manchester United proved recently in a women's FA Cup final at Wembley, there are great rewards to be had for leagues which take women's sport seriously. I know that the current league administration and the commission are taking great credit for the expansion of the women's game, but we both know that this was a revolution which was always going to happen. It was just waiting for the AFL to finally open the floodgates to allow women in. Pity we can't get Sarah on today, Professor. I'd really like to talk more with Sarah about, and you guys, of course, about where the women's game is going, but I just don't think the AFL has really ever respected the women's version of the game. It looks good. It looks good for their following, the stakeholders, as it were, but this is always going to happen because the AFL have been so bloody minded in keeping the women's game from developing. This should have happened 10 years ago at least. But anyway, the women's game is going well. But I think it's despite the AFL, not because of it.
Well, if you look at the AFLW season, John, there was an announcement, greatly trumpeted announcement, what weekend it would start. But that's all we know about it. Now, with due deference to Paul and the NRLW, we know what the season looks like, how long it's going to go for, when it's going to be on TV. We know everything. We know nothing about the AFLW season. Now, how can a major competition be? You know nothing about it, and there's less than 3 months before it starts.
Because the AFL doesn't see it as a major competition. It's just got that little W on the end of our name, and that's the girls playing the game. Paul, I reckon that the NRL has done it pretty well. It seems to me.
Yeah, they've tied it in with the men's game, and that's not saying that it needs to piggyback on the men's game, but the way they've done it is grown the profile of the women's game as a standalone event, and they've set up, as we continually say on the show, they've put teams where they want teams and where they have the resources, not simply because that's where they want a team to be. So there's a demand for the teams, and most importantly, there's the players there. So the new additions will be fantastic. This women's comp, the ratings will go through the roof, no doubt.
I don't know that your game is obviously as much as AFL, but it seems to me that it's still a very geographic and parochial game. Whereas St Kilda, I mean, if taking one example of a club I know, well, no one thinks of St Kilda as being at St Kilda. In fact, it hasn't been for 100 years or so. And maybe Geelong is different, but nobody thinks everybody in Carlton comes from Carlton. But that's different in your game, isn't it? It's still a pretty parochial, geographic game. Would you say that?
Well, it is, and we'll talk about it soon. But the game today, Newcastle and Manly, you wouldn't find too many people in those areas that go for other teams. Well, particularly Newcastle is much like Geelong. So screaming out for a women's team, and they're going to be a success there, and as are the areas that they've added. So it is definitely a tribal thing. A lot of certain clubs, like I'm a Rabbitohs fan, I grew up near Cronulla, but a lot of parochialism is there, particularly in your towns like Newcastle and the Brisbane Broncos, for example. You won't get more fanatical fans.
Paul, it's one of my, I don't know, I wouldn't say obsessions, but certainly interest, is why people barrack for their team. It's fascinating. And when I told you guys the story about a fellow who I met who followed the Saints, I said, why do you follow the Saints? I always do. And he said, my school teacher in grade 2 made it her mission in life to make every kid in her class barrack for St Kilda and the whole class barrack for St Kilda. But if you ask most people in rugby league, why do you barrack for your team? I would imagine, my parents barrack for them, and I lived down the way. I lived there.
Yeah, it wasn't easy for me because I'd say 80% of my high school went for the Sharks. And I'd go along to the Sharks Hill in my Rabbitohs jersey and have a terrible time. One time they burnt a hole in a backpack that Mum had just bought me, and I was 27. It was a really tough moment. But I felt a lipstick red on my hand one time. So it is very parochial there down at Shark Park, particularly if you're wearing a red and green jersey, I can assure you.
If you went down to the version of Auskick, do they have Auskick in NRL?
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
That? Well, if you went down to Cronulla, I suspect that 90% would have that jersey, the Cronulla jersey. But if you go to any Auskick in Victoria, well, they're all wearing every different team colour. Yeah,
it definitely is more a regional thing though, and you'd get so teams like the Dragons, their fans would be all over because it's not as tied to the area, but there are certain sections of Sydney which is very largely rugby league, like Penrith area, for example, and that's impeding the growth of GWS because that's rugby league, and every single family is from a soccer background as well. But there's no real history of AFL there in Western Sydney, the 3 million people that live there. That there's a large following of the Bulldogs in the closer inner west, then Parramatta's in the centre of Sydney geographically, and then Penrith is further out. And it's no surprise that Penrith won 2 premierships because of all the young players coming through from that catchment area of literally over 1 million people.
And which is a recipe for success in the women's game, because
it is, yeah.
Same with the women in the area want to play the team, and the people in the area want to see the girls. They want to see the people that they know, and so they'll support the game. So that to me is probably the main reason why your league, plus to the fact you've built it up incrementally, is why it's going so well.
Yeah.
Judge, just while we're on women's sport, Collingwood Football Club announced during the week that they were withdrawing their netball team, and I was talking to a few people about this on Friday, and I said to them, well, this is nothing new. And they said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, you know that Collingwood used to have a soccer team. And they said, no, we didn't know that they used to have a soccer team. I said, yeah, Carlton and Collingwood both had soccer teams, and they got rid of them simply because, well, the AFL encouraged them to divest themselves of the licenses, but it's basically a conflict of interest. You're encouraging your support away from your AFL team and your AFLW team. So, of course, if something's got to go, it'll be the netball team.
It makes no sense to me why a football team would get into that puddle, which is just nothing that they know about. But it's just also, I would bet you, there were men at the Collingwood Footy Club. It's a male thing. Oh yeah, we can do that. How hard can it be to set up a netball team? Looks pretty easy. You only need fewer players, and we got so much money. Doesn't matter. Let's do it. It was always going to end in tears, and it looks like it has. Well,
especially if the team is not making as much money as they thought it would, and it's dragging funds away from your core business, which is Australian rules football. Like you're going to cut off the thing that's causing you to lose money, aren't you?
Yeah. Any business that's doing very well in its core business and that suddenly diversifies into something you knows nothing about, well, it's got mud written all over it. So, yeah, no great surprise, and probably won't be missed according to what we hear about Netball Australia. I don't think they're going to miss them too much.
So you're expecting a response from Gil, Judge?
Oh, about netball?
No, about the whole letter.
Oh, sorry. Probably not. No, but I just think he listens to himself too much. That's the impression I get. Well, what did you say about what Melbourne's doing? Their players, they're
drinking their own bathwater.
Their own bathwater. Yeah.
You've come in off a longer run up than Sean Tate. I like it.
Well, I've been a bit sick of it, to be honest, Paul. And Gorgeous Gill doesn't seem to get the scrutiny that perhaps he ought to. Now, mind you, those other 8 executives should also be under the pump, Paul. I mean, they're well paid. He just seems to be the public face of the thing.
He might be at his ranch now at Birregurra in the Range Rover parked outside and in the polo gear, digesting what you've said.
And what will he do next, Paul?
He'd go into a corporate job, I'd say, advisory, lobbyist, perhaps. I don't know. Maybe not a lobbyist if he's too casual.
Is there a job going in Brisbane for the 32 games?
Well, maybe he could be the next Kevin Gosper.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
He's got the pedigree for it. All right.
Yeah.
Enough of that. Round 13 of the NRL, Paul. Before we just look at round 13 specifically, Tina Turner died during the week. Now, she had a profound effect on the NRL for a very long time. It'd be almost 30 years. Perhaps if we could just, I know it's a question without warning, but your thoughts on the impact she had on the NRL and advertising the game.
Well, I watched what I think is one of the best ads for NRL. It would have been a minor hit down here then. What you get is what you see, and it ended with the Winfield Cup, so that shows you how long ago it was. But she became very close to some of the players. Benny Elias, she was close to Andrew Eddinghausen. A lot of women loved him, and she was always amazed that Alan Langer could play the game. He should be more sort of writing one of the things that Gilding will be talking about than playing rugby league. But she was always amazed that someone so tiny could be such a superstar. So she got right into it, and I just thought it captured it perfectly. It wasn't sleazy. I mean, it's a lot of blokes running around without their shirts off, but forgive me, but I'll steal from the Batuta Advocate. They said that Vale to the first woman who made rugby league players look attractive. That wasn't the exact words used, but she certainly showed them in a new light and without a lot of clothes on. But I just loved her songs, and I think some of them were the best anthems that we've had for rugby league. And she really brought that fun side of it, the dynamic side of it, and just the simplicity of pure magic music. And it's just a great, simple sport. I love the sport, and I loved her campaigns, ad campaigns for the game.
All right, Paul. Thursday night, we saw the Dolphins chalk up yet another win. It's been a very good season for him. The Dragons couldn't make it 2 in a row, and schoolboy star Jermaine Asako had a day out for his 100th game, 2 tries and 5 conversions.
Yep.
Wayne Bennett was asked about him, and he just had a bit of a chuckle.
Well, I had a few mates who'd invested on the new coach theory for the Dragons. That was the week before, and I had one of those mates say, "Can the new coach theory last for 2 weeks?" But it's normally a one-off phenomenon when a team that's been going terribly rises up and wins, and that's exactly what happened. The Dolphins were just too classy. There's a lot of angry players at the Dragons, and there's a lot of players there that want to play to show the new coach, which will be Jason Riles. I'm waiting for that to be confirmed if it hasn't already, to show him that they're worthy of a spot in the team. So they did play okay, the Dragons, but the Dolphins at home are building quite a record there, and they're a really great story to watch, the Dolphins. No one can hold it against them, what they've managed to do.
Can I just on that, Paul? I said this to you before, but can you draw a line between, or connection between the Dolphins and what could be happening in Tasmania? The Dolphins didn't come from wealth. I think they've got money in the bank, but they're not an incredibly wealthy club. Their facilities, I don't think, are world class. And there's a salary. There's no draft. There's a salary cap. That's right, isn't it, for NRL?
Yeah, that's right.
So, go on.
Well, I'd rather compare it to, and this is not a criticism, I'm simply highlighting the difference between the way they've started and the way that GWS and the Suns did. You put in one of the best coaches of all time, who's ridiculed for missing out on at least 10 players, would have been his marquee player. And I've got to compare it to the basketball that's on at the moment. There's one guy at the Celtics that everyone talks about, Jason Tatum. In every rugby league team, there's one player at least who's a superstar. But in this team, you can't really say. I mean, they're young players. There's some old heads, and he's just got them all playing together. And it's just one of the best coaching efforts I've seen in 40 years of following rugby league.
And Paul, the NRL hasn't got involved and said all you teams have got to give, a couple of players to the Dolphins.
No.
Haven't they just gone from scratch, got the players, fit within a salary cap, and just bloody done it? And they've done it in a very short period of time.
I'm certain the NRL would have absolutely loved one of those 10 minimum, if not 12 marquee players. And I'm sure there's a way it could have been assisted by, or as you say, the clubs could have been strongly urged to assist or allow. And we need this to happen. We don't have a draft as such, but you can tell that the NRL hasn't been involved because none of the players went there. So he's still on the lookout for his $1 million man, but he hasn't really needed it as yet. They've overachieved in terms of expectations, but I'm loving watching them play.
But Paul, as you said, haven't they done it the right way? They went to a rugby league area, which there was a gap there for them. They didn't go to the Gold Coast or anywhere else or try to introduce anything. This was an established, successful club that had the nucleus was there. And then they've brought in these things, and it is filling the gap that they needed. They needed another side, there in Brisbane and all that. And it's perfectly done. And as you said, rugby area, rugby people, nucleus, bring in the best, and it's worked marvellously well.
In terms of comparisons, I mean, I live in the area, but I'd compare it almost to a Williamstown coming in, that the Bulldogs have a giant support network and it's a big area. But given how fast that area is growing from where I'm at down towards Werribee Way, it's almost a Williamstown-sized club that's capturing that part of the area. So in Brisbane, it's a city of, 2.5 million people at least. You've got Gold Coast, which is a very defined area to the south. But north of Brisbane, there's nothing at all. So there's enough support for the Broncos. And also, as I said, like with Williamstown down to Werribee, it's almost like capturing that area of new people that have moved there recently. But you see the Dolphins fans, they're not bolted on fans from somewhere else or flown in by the NRL. They're locals that love their footy. And there'd be a lot worse weekends away than going to watch your team play at Moreton Bay and Redcliffe. It would be, and I'm sure the AFL's hoping people will do that with Tasmania and use it as a weekend to go and see Hobart down the track in 2048 when they start playing. But we'll see what happens there. But it really has been a fantastic success for the NRL this year, and no one can begrudge what they've done.
Paul, I was just thinking about actually, say, Port Melbourne or Williamstown, same kind of thing. It'd have been possible for Williamstown to join the AFL. It's fanciful, but what a great thing it would be for a place like that to do what the Dolphins have done. Anyway. Yeah.
And that's why you didn't have too much opposition from the Broncos. They were smart enough to realise that, yes, it's their town, is their town, but the rivalries will be amazing, and they already have started to be. And the extra games, the extra club, and that's why they're pushing towards maybe another Brisbane team, is to add the 10 million a year to the revenue, the pay TV deal. So Brisbane is booming to the point they could fit another team in. They probably will have one there within a few years, probably before the AFL Tasmania team.
And they're not looking at a Melbourne team. And the Storm has been fantastically successful, and yet the NRL's resisted a second Melbourne team, whereas the AFL thinks, GWS, it'll fit like a hand in a glove. I mean, you and I just sitting to say that was never going to happen. Just like China, it's never going to happen. You give it a go, but it hasn't worked, and it's not going to work.
It's not all roses, though. There is an opening game of the NRL is in Las Vegas. I'm not for that concept. I don't know what they're going to get out of the American market. I think it's going to be a double header. Russell Crowe's going to be involved with my Rabbitohs. I don't like it. I think you should focus on your core areas, unlike the AFL with China. But let's see how we go. There's already a Raiders team in Las Vegas, and they're bringing in another Raiders team, so that might just confuse the locals. But I'm surprised about that. But I'm all for trying to capture new markets. I don't think it'll be a great success, but I don't want to be negative.
Well, that's a good segue, Paul. You're talking about the Rabbitohs. The Rabbitohs premiership favourites lowered their colours last night to the Raiders, 26-33. The team, no doubt, weakened because of origin selections.
They were, but and it also highlights what's been very impressive with Jack Whiten and the Raiders. I thought it would have been a very tough chat for him to say to his teammates, listen, I don't think we're going to win the comp, so I'm going to go and join another team. The ultimate irony, it seems to have galvanised the Raiders, that since Whiten's decided to leave, they've almost banded together to send Jack out, hopefully a winner of a comp for Raiders fans, but at least put on a good season. So the Rabbitohs were belted last week by the Eels, and they've lost another. I was worried for a while that we might have peaked too early, so they've got to get it back together. There was a very tough moment on the field. A player had a seizure, not concussion related as far as I know, but he's okay, but he was taken off on a stretcher. Corey Warira Naira. It was, Corey Harawira Naira. It was very scary scenes to see someone convulsing on the field. But he's okay now. He sent a message at 3 a.m. On Twitter. So a tough loss for the Rabbitohs. The Raiders are playing very well. They're going to be even more dangerous than they were last year when they snuck into the 8. Parramatta's found a lot of form as well. They dispatched with the very disappointing North Queensland 24-16. And the Broncos, who normally lose every match during Origin period, shows that they've got some premiership credentials because they managed to have a win over at New Zealand Warriors, who've been playing pretty well. So I think the difference is that Adam Reynolds is there and he's not away on Origin duty. If they didn't have Reynolds, they wouldn't have won over in New Zealand, but that was one that got away from the Warriors.
Paul, just going back to the Rabbitohs for a second, Jason Demetrio in his press conference said he had a lot to be happy about, leading 24-22 with about 8 or 9 minutes to go, and they should have put the game away and didn't. So even with people out for Origin, the Rabbitohs had the chance to win the game and didn't.
They should have, and that's a worrying sign because I think a team like the Panthers probably would have put that game away.
All right, today's game, there's only one because of Origin at 4:05 p.m. The Knights at 13 playing the Seagulls at number 9, and you would expect the Seagulls normally to be favourites to win this match, but not only no Turbo, but no Trebojevics. All 3 Trebojevics are out of the side. Schooner wants to know what chances he's got. I thought without Cherry Evans as well, they've got no chance.
Well, I can't get Manly right at all. I don't mind if Schooner's a bit annoyed at me because I tipped them to lose and they win by 30 points like they did last week. I tell you who will be playing well for the Knights are 2 players spurned by Queensland, and that's Kalen Ponga at the back. He's one of the best players in the game, has been brushed aside for Reece Walsh. But the most disappointing is Dane Gagai, who's been the most loyal servant you can imagine to Queensland. The hardest part for Dane, it was leaked in the media that he wasn't going to be playing. Queensland used to have the loyal mentality and it worked for 10, 15 years, pick and stick. But they've actually gone with form players. Dane Gagai's been playing well. I wouldn't want to be trying to tackle him today. I think Newcastle will win. Sorry, Schooner. I just think that Kalen Ponga and Dane Gagai. But on a brighter note for Schooner, that you've got a player, Josh Schuster, who's only been around for a short time, said, I can be the best player in the game if you don't mind, Professor. So putting a fair rap on himself.
A name to watch, perhaps, Paul.
Yes, so let's see if he can conjure up a win up there at Newcastle without Cherry Evans next to him. He'll be well on the way to maybe being one of the better players as opposed to the best player to play the game.
All right, Paul, State of Origin this Wednesday night. There's been some rumblings. I read a column by Nick Tedeschi, who is a former commentator on this program. He said that Billy Slater had outsmarted Brad Fittler in selection. And he had 2 players he particularly singled out being selected. Tavita Pangai Jr., he didn't like that selection, and Jerome Luai to start over Nico Hines. So the floor is over to you, Paul. Tell us how the Blues are going to win this game.
We always look good on paper, the Blues. So I think Nico Hines coming off the bench, he'll be used, I think, quite well by Brad Fittler. He's gone with the combinations to the point of leaving out the Rabbitohs incumbent hooker so that he can have the Penrith combinations. So he's gone with Coruscant, the Panthers hooker. So you've got 6, 7 and 9 all from the Panthers. So I think he's gone with chemistry Fittler. Tavita Pangai Jr. is as mad as a cut snake, and there's more potential for fireworks than Chinatown on New Year's Eve. You're going to see some fireworks. I just hope he doesn't do something stupid and get sent off and cost us the game. There's a feeling that we were out-muscled in Game 3 last year, so they've brought in an absolute lunatic to try and bring some heavy, almost like a bodyguard to protect players like Nico Hines and like Jerome Luai. So I think Queensland will lay the bait for Tavita, and let's see if he launches in, because he is like, I remember doing chemistry experiments with magnesium when you'd light it. That's how explosive Tavita Pangai is. I'm worried.
Tell us more about this guy who just creates his cut snake. Paul, what's his go-to craziness?
No, well, the comparisons are going way back to Mark Geyer in 1991. You might remember the iconic footage of him and Wally Lewis, and he's about half a foot taller. And Wally's pointing at his face. Guy was told you can do whatever you like and you won't get sent off. It's Origin. So Origin went out like a Pamplona bull and was just throwing more punches than Tyson in his prime. Just absolute unleashed fury. So these days, though, you can't get away with that. And if Pangai throws a punch, he'll be off. That's Origin, but these days he'll be off.
And I'll just give a disclaimer warning, Professor, of course, that this program does not encourage violence
No.
whatsoever.
Especially,
So,
yeah, go on, Gelding.
Just one for the giraffe. The Adelaide experience. I fully understand what rugby league's trying to do. You know, take their wonderful product, their best product in state of origin to grow the game. But, geez, if I was a Sydney person following the game or someone at Brisbane, you would pack out the Sydney Stadium, you would pack out the Queensland Stadium. Is this going to continue where they're going to sell their best product off to try to spread the game, whereas you would have a fantastic atmosphere up in Sydney or Queensland, you know, if the first one was there and then you get a decider or something for the third game? Is it robbing Peter to pay Paul? Or is it just...
Yeah, the NRL's rationale is because it's unfair to have two games. So if you're going to play it in Sydney, then you'd have to have a neutral venue for a third game, unless you want to go back to the old system, which is 1 year Queensland would have two games and the next year New South Wales would have two. I don't like playing it away because, as you say, it's the best product. Why would you be put? It's like playing an English FA Cup final in America. But why would you do that? So I'm not for it, and I would prefer to go back to the alternating two games at one, or even playing it in Melbourne as a much more advanced rugby league venue than Adelaide. But the problem here, of course, is it's not a great stadium for rugby type sports. The MCG, you're too far from the action. The same as with that Liverpool game.
And won't that be the same in Adelaide? Whereas you've got these purpose-built grounds in Sydney and Queensland, which are fantastic stadia in their own right. And, you know, you're right on it and they become cauldrons. And I don't know, they can still sell the product through the TV. Yeah. But, you know, they haven't even sold out the tickets for it yet. Whereas
no, I think that
if this was
in
Queensland, it would have been sold out 2 months ago.
But there's more of a focus on the TV side of things in NRL than AFL. So it's sad, but they'll be looking at, they could put this anywhere in Australia and it will rate 4 million people. So I think that they're not as concerned about local attendances as much as it is an opportunity to grow the game. They're looking at those bums on seats in living rooms, and that will be justified. But and also too, it takes away that benefit. But there is a team with the third game at home, so that's also a benefit as well.
So Paul, who'll win it and why?
I think New South Wales in a close one. I'm thinking 26-20 is my prediction. I think that I don't mind the combination of Luai and Cleary, and also Coruscant, who's one of the smartest players in the game, even though at the expense of my Rabbitohs man, Damien Cook. I think the chemistry is everything. And the irony is that New South Wales is building some, and it's Queensland who's bringing in new players. So Reece Walsh better be ready for a baptism of fire at the back, I can assure you.
Okay, and given its state of origin, we always ask you for these special ones. Who'll be first try?
I think you've got to go with Tommy Turbo. We've won some money on him over the years.
Who's certain to score a try, apart from Turbo?
Latrell, saving himself. He's going to run amok, I think. That could be the difference, and he could win the man of the match.
Well, there you go. I was just about to ask you man of the match. So Latrell for a score, a try, and man of the match double.
Yes, I think he could do everything bar give the tribute at the start there, Latrell. So get on him to do everything.
All right. Let's just go back to the Knights Sea-Eagles game. Final score for that one, in your thoughts?
Yeah, sorry, Schooner. And despite having what he self-proclaimed best player in the game, or could be the best player in the game, I think Newcastle win that 22-14. Worth keeping an eye on Josh Schuster, though. He's a very good player. I don't think he meant it to come out the way it sounded, that he'll be the best ever.
We'll get you to be his publicist, Paul.
Yeah, that's it. I like results first because a man's actions speak loudest of when spoken of by others, someone said once.
All right, Gelding, your big part in the show, your tips.
No, it's not too bad. Did the even money bet get up, Professor?
No, sadly
No.
it didn't. No, we
Okay.
both you and I did get a look in, even though the judge was coming off the longest run up I've ever seen. Gelding, his run up was so long this afternoon that the attendant had to open the gate so he could go outside the oval perimeter to start his run up.
Talk about long runs, Professor. I remember going to the MCG and watching Wes Hall play many, many years ago. He actually kicked off from the boundary fence. So, but obviously the judges put a lot of thought into that letter.
I actually saw DK Lilley do the same thing coming into Viv Richards one day at the G, and he actually got to the back fence and just tapped his foot in the fence like,
yeah. Very, very
I can't go back any further.
Yeah, beautiful. But it was a very, very good letter. Anyway, Professor, let's try and get a couple of winners today for everyone, so they can follow Paul's tips on Wednesday night. Look, racing at Horsham and Ballarat. Horsham today, like race 1, number 6, Kodak. Anthony and Sam Freeman are taking this horse from Mornington to Horsham to try to win its maidens. It's had 4 starts for 4 seconds, Professor. Anyone that wants to travel 4 hours in a float with a horse to win a race, they're certainly not going there for a haircut, as you say, Paul. So hopefully Kodak can win the first. We then like race 2, number 2, Field of Mars. Simon Zara, again, training at Flemington, going to Horsham to try to get this horse to get a win. Linda Meach goes to ride it. So hopefully we can get a couple of winners in the first mains to build a bank. They're pretty short, Professor, $2 and $3, but hopefully they'll get there. Then we like race 6, number 8, Alexis, and hopefully that'll be Horsham. We like a couple at Ballarat today. Professor, race 3, number 1, Collision, into race 5, number 3, I don't get it. Into race 6, number 2, Matamar, formerly trained by Mick Price, but since changing stables to H. Powell, has won 2 out of its 3 starts. And then we'll go race 7, horse 8, Sir Atlas, Lindsay Smith, Brett Mertens, 2 starts for 2 wins. Hopefully that can be a profitable day for people, Professor.
When you say Gelding, formerly trained by Mick Price and now's gone to a trainer who we don't hear much about, we know what Mick said to the owners.
Yes. Yes, move it on.
We've had that same conversation with Mick.
Yes, and when I say he only says moving on, I'm being very kind to him. There's a lot of adjectives in it.
Oh dear, Gelding, that's racing for you though.
Oh, that's racing, Professor, and we just talking on that's racing. We'll have to lift our game with the Professor's Parlay next week, Professor.
Yes, Gelding, it's first time we've had a run of outs for a little while. Although the place parlay is still alive.
Still alive, beautiful thing.
Mark, the Zinger count today, good to see that Paul's back in fine form. Got to double figures, got to 10. A surprise guest announcement by the Professor with his Zinger, which took about 30 seconds to sort of get out. Good to him. And an honourable mention to myself. My little pun about the price going of the stadium going through the roof. I thought that was hilarious. Anyway.
Yeah, very nicely done.
Very nicely done, John. All right,
You'll be here next week.
That's a great way to close the show. Thanks very much, gentlemen, and we'll